Welcome to Genealogy Works. I'm Ruby Coleman in Nebraska, and I'm going to bring you facts and ideas about genealogical research. This video is Nebraska Homestead records. If you like my videos, please subscribe. You can contact me at rvcole@charter.net. That's R-V as in Virginia, Cole, C-O-L-E, at charter.net for a copy of the handout for this video. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy proclaimed that the Homestead Act was the single greatest stimulus to national development ever enacted. It certainly had an impact on the lives of thousands of people and also on our genealogical research we do today. Before the Civil War, there was a need to provide settlers with Western land. The United States government realized that the Transcontinental Railroad would get them west, and at the same time, new states created in the West would not be slave states. The development of a transcontinental railroad was stalled during the Civil War. Naturally, these ideas of creating free states in the West were opposed by the South. The key idea was free land through sweat equity. The land was free if settlers would prove up on it and live on it for a specific time period. The United States government passed the Homestead Act on the 20th of May, 1862, providing land for the common person, primarily adult males. They had to establish residency for a continuous 5 years. Congress felt the act would prevent speculators from buying property, but it did not. An entryman could receive 160 acres of surveyed public land for a filing fee. Most of the Homestead Act claims were filed from 1863 through 1917. The law was abolished in 1976, and about 285 million acres of land had been dispersed. Approximately 80 million acres were obtained by homesteaders and small farmers, with 420 million going to cattlemen, miners, lumbermen, and railroaders. Prior to the passing of the Homestead Act, military veterans could apply for bounty land. The act replaced military bounty lands. To obtain the land, they had to be a citizen and had to file a declaration to become a citizen. They were exempt from repossession and any debts prior to making entry that were not attached to the homestead land. A husband and wife could not both hold separate unfinished claims. Deserted wives, however, could file a claim. The claimant had 5 years to establish a residence and cultivate the land. This was called proving up on the claim. If the claimant died before receiving the patent, the widow or heirs did not lose application and they could continue the process. Union soldiers could deduct time up to 4 years served from residency requirements. This could not reduce for more than 4 years. Families of soldiers could file on their behalf and live on the property during the Civil War. After meeting all of the requirements, the claimant was issued a final patent showing the land was owned free and clear. Many commuted by showing minor improvements after 6 months and paying $1.25 per acre for the land. Millions of acres were commuted to cash and resold at a profit. The dwelling on the land had to be at least 12 by 14. Not specifically shown that it was feet, but of course we know it was. Everything was not as planned by the government for the provisions of the Homestead Act. Phony claimants were hired and the land resold to big land developers. The General Land Office was underfunded, so could not regulate all of the land. There was also bribery among land office officials and the claimants. In Nebraska, there were 131,000 claimants, and out of that, 87,000 actually became homesteaders or received their patents. Approximately 780,000 claimants in the United States received patents, indicating a 60% completion rate. Overall, there were approximately 2 million entries made. 1/10 were filed by women, and most of those were filed after 1900. So what was the process in doing all of this? The land had to first be surveyed and then located. The claimant usually knew where the land was available or could obtain information on available land at the land office. The claim was filed usually at the land office, however, some filed directly to Washington, D.C. The claimant took an oath and proved his or her marital status and citizenship. The documents that are usually within the homestead file are the filing statement, application for patent, affidavits of witnesses, and final certificate. Once the claimant had received the patent, it was recorded in the courthouse. This is not the actual patent, what you find in the courthouse. The original case files are in the National Archives. Those for Nebraska have been digitized and are online at Fold 3, which is a subscription website. Most of the claimants used a land agent to locate the land. The land was scouted out for availability in a county or particular township. The land office filings showed also surveys, so they could check and see what was available or who had claimed certain parcels of land. Land jobbers moved west ahead of the surveying crews. Before the survey was done, they bought up the best spots or locations at $1.25 an acre under the 1841 Preemption Act, and that could be converted to the Homestead Act. Some land was sold to speculators in blocks of 10,000 to 600,000 acres. In 1889, Congress enforced limitations of only 320 acres. Jobbers also employed people to spend 6 months on the land and then bought it from them for $1.25 an acre. It was actually worth more than that. The jobbers used portable cabins on wheels and hired witnesses to testify that there was a dwelling on the land. In 1907, J.C. Brown had settled in Cherry County, Nebraska. His brothers, who were living in Kansas, eventually arrived, looking also for homestead land. The brother Benny contested a homestead that had been filed by Charles Hohenstein, stating that Hohenstein had abandoned it. And this is something found in newspapers. Patents are recorded usually in the courthouse of the county where the land was located, or also in the land office. These recordings are not the original patent. Some were recorded later than the original patent date. For every land transaction besides homestead of the federal government, patents were also recorded. While the original files are in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., a good deal of information can be found online. To determine if your ancestor purchased land from the federal government, be it homestead, sales, or any other acts, the Bureau of Land Management should first be checked, and this is online. The complete homestead files, again, are on Fold 3. You can also search the United States tract books at Family Search. This is an example from the Bureau of Land Management website. I strongly suggest when you go there that you read all the information about the website, the types of records, before performing a search. Click on Search Documents in the menu bar, and it will take you to this website. Keep in mind, this website is not just for Nebraska, but for the public domain land. Fill out the location and then the name or names. I normally leave the rest blank, as I normally do not know the land description when I begin my search, or many times if the person even had purchased land from the federal government. I have filled in Custer County, Nebraska for a man named George A. Copsey. He filed under the Homestead Act through the Grand Island Land Office for 160 acres. He received a patent on the 30th of January, 1884, and his land was located in Township 17 North, Range 18 West, Section 27, Northwest Quarter. Under that information, there is a place to click on the map, which produces this map showing where Section 27 is located in Custer County. On the Bureau of Land Management website, you can click on Patent to retrieve a PDF file of the patent. This is just a one-sheet patent. This is not the complete file, and what is in the courthouse actually does not look like this. If your ancestor owned land in Nebraska, this is a good place to look for maps and valuable information. Before land could be sold, it had to be surveyed. The site contains the original plats along with field notes made by the surveyors. The site is Nebraska State Surveyor's Office. You should plan on spending time at this site. From the survey maps online at the Nebraska State Surveyor's Office, this is an example of an original survey. A full description is shown of the location and detailed information regarding the rivers and land formations. This was surveyed 1868 to 1872. The tract books on Family Search are more difficult to use simply because you need to know the exact land description, but they're worth looking at to see the land your ancestor owned. And these can be found at FamilySearch.org. This is an 1865 map of Kansas and Nebraska showing the land offices, all of which were located in the eastern part of each state. Notice that some of the land had been surveyed and is shown with township ranges and sections. Fold 3 is a subscription database. There are libraries and also family history centers where you can use this database without subscribing. While it is primarily complete with military records, there are other records available, such as the Homestead Records of Nebraska. Here you will find the complete homestead file for people who received patents on their homestead land. It's only for Nebraska. Other state homestead records are in the National Archives. The index to case files on Fold 3 contains only the name of the applicant, or his surname, or her surname, and not every name that is shown on the documents, such as the names of the witnesses. The sidebar of source information on Fold 3 is very important. Don't overlook it. It gives complete information regarding the source plus the land office, the applicant's name, the location of the land, and the dates. From Fold 3, this is the cover sheet of a homestead application file for a man named David Zering. He obtained land through the land office in North Platte, Nebraska on the 24th of April, 1888. However, the land was not located very close to the land office. It was located north and east. The description of the land is shown. Through the Clerk of Court office for Custer County, Nebraska, where the land was located, David Zering of Anselmo, Custer County, Nebraska, filed his homestead affidavit. It gives further information regarding him along with his original signature. Within the files, there are testimonies of witnesses. On this, we see that David Zering was deceased, and the land had transferred to his widow, Sarah Zering. The witness states that David Zering lived on the land until his death in the fall of 1888. He was never absent, and his widow had lived on the land since his death and improved upon it. Each season, 47 acres had been cultivated. There is a description of their sod house and other buildings. Because David Zering had served in the Civil War, there is a copy of his discharge papers on file. This is from the Adjutant General's office in Iowa, and it indicates that David had served as a private in Company G, 14th Regiment of Infantry in Ohio. It also indicates that he was discharged because of disability. More information indicates his personal characteristics and that he was born in Delaware County, Ohio. David Zering filed the affidavit for obtaining the patent on the 20th of April, 1888, and he died on the 12th of October, 1888. The final affidavit was signed by his widow, Sarah M. Zering, and she indicated she was his widow and had cultivated, improved, and lived on the land as his widow. Notices of final proof were placed in newspapers. This is one from the Myrna Reporter of Custer County, Nebraska, indicating that Sarah Zering, widow of David, had filed final proof on the land. In the newspaper notices, the witnesses were named, and each had to provide testimony regarding the land and that she had proved up on it. After she gained patent to this land, she sold it and moved to Oregon. Some of the files contain a summation form showing the homestead process and valuation of the property. This is a naturalization certificate for a man who needed it for proof on homestead land in Keith County, Nebraska. This actual certificate will not be located in a courthouse as it was received by the new citizen. He had it in his possession. The certificate indicates he filed his declaration of intention in Houghton County, Michigan. Some of the homestead files at Fold 3 will have a synopsis of naturalization information received from the county where they were naturalized. In this case, it was from Muscatine County, Iowa. The applicant needed this information to submit for proof when filing for homestead land. The homestead file for Thomas G. Gardner of Custer County, Nebraska contains his signature plus a statement he had filed a preemption on the land and wished to have it changed to a homestead. The same Thomas G. Gardner had served in the Civil War from Missouri. His complete homestead file at Fold 3 shows information received from the War Department indicating where he enrolled in the war in Missouri and the unit and when discharged. This information lowered the years of improvement upon the land. The homestead files will contain information on buildings, whether they were sod or frame, when built, the value of the land, and the acres planted. They also contain information on the animals owned and even the furniture inside of the house. The claimant could be absent for only a brief period of time and had to report if they had been absent. In this case, the claimant had been absent 5 months during the winter of 1884 through 1885 because his wife and family were sick. They had removed to North Platte, a city nearby, but he states that he visited his property during that time. Information regarding homestead land can be found in newspapers. People looking for land were often mentioned in what we call gossip information, like who is visiting in town. Town and village information may also contain the same type of information. Legal notices contain information on the final proof or about abandoned property. Read the advertisements to see if there were land agents or land jobbers in the area. The newspaper, the Columbus Journal of Columbus, Nebraska, the 3rd of May, 1882, contained this legal notice indicating that Thomas Sullivan had sufficient final proof on homestead land from the Grand Island, Nebraska Land Office. This is an item found in the same newspaper in 1885 from the Town News column. It indicates that Michael J. Clark took his homestead in 1875 and was doing quite well. McCook, Nebraska is located fairly close to the Kansas border. It's not unusual for land agents in other states to place advertisements in state newspapers. Bertrand and Doom were real estate agents in Oberlin, Kansas, and they advertised that they had abandoned homestead land in western Kansas and also in Nebraska. This is a larger advertisement from the Pioneer Land Office in Colby, Kansas. They advertised for various types of land, such as railroad lands, homesteads, timber culture lands, and preemptions. Sometimes land clues can be found in very strange places. These photographs were on Facebook for the page of Nebraska Through the Lens. The building has a stone nearby with 1870 on it and made in 1860 by Dr. E.A. Thomas, native son. This tells us nothing about land and also nothing about Dr. E.A. Thomas, but we can look a little bit further. And here we have another portion of the stone showing 1870. Elmer Alonzo Thomas was born in 1874 in Webster County, Nebraska, to Lorenzo Dow Thomas and Mary Ann Chambers. Elmer was the author of the book 80 Years in Webster County. Then we can discover that his father, Lorenzo Dow Thomas, filed for 160 acres of land in Webster County, Nebraska under the Homestead Act and through the land office at Bloomington, Nebraska. Free land did not mean the good life. There were challenges on the frontier, such as blizzards, persistent windstorms, plagues of insects, diseases, drought, and wildfires. On the prairies in Nebraska, there were few trees for building, so many lived in dugouts or sod houses. Fuel and water was limited, and they soon discovered that they did not have enough land to sustain agriculture. Because of all of this, many never fulfilled their requirements for the homestead land. Not all land office clerks were honest. This is a newspaper account of N.T. Ladd, clerk of the U.S. Land Office in Broken Bow, Nebraska. He was charged on 4 indictments: theft of public records, theft of letters belonging to the land office, impersonating officials, and embezzlement of public money. In Box Butte County, Nebraska, in the Panhandle, a land jobber, land office agent, and a publicist lured many illiterate blacks into filing for homestead. The land jobber would then tell them he would pay them more than their filing fee if they would assign the land over to him, which they did. The land then would be sold to ranchers in the area. In Nebraska in the early 1890s, there was significant prolonged drought. It began in the early 1890s. This resulted in an all-time low in farm prices. Some sold their land, many of whom had obtained the land through the Homestead Act. 1894 was a significant year in that businesses were forced to close. There were many failed banks, livestock starved, and the state was in an era of famine. Particularly in central and western parts of the state, land prices fell to almost nothing. The depression and drought continued into 1897, and then in 1898 things began to improve, but not before many people sold the property or abandoned it. The legal notices of the McCook Weekly Tribune of McCook, Nebraska in 1884 contain information on the abandonment of a homestead. It was entered by Thomas Golfer against Ira Kimball, who had abandoned his homestead. From this, it is apparent that Golfer had discovered the abandoned land and reported it to the U.S. Land Office at McCook. Perhaps he wished to obtain the land. Another subscription website with land information is historygeo.com. There are various parts to the website, but basically you can locate an ancestor's land and more views of the land by using the First Landowners Project. On this website, I did a search for the surname of Roberts in Wyoming. Each blue circle represents a location and the number of people in that surname in records there. As you can see, there's a lot of Robertses in Wyoming. I selected Elizabeth Roberts, who owned land in Wyoming. It is shown here with a patent date of 1914 and appears to consist of a good deal of land. It is helpful to also look at the neighbors. Were they related? By clicking on patent details, I can learn more about Elizabeth Roberts' land, which was located in Weston County, Wyoming. She filed under the Homestead Act. Notice the options that begin with View. By clicking on these, I can view other information, such as this terrain map showing the land. You can also locate the land in historygeo.com on a current map. This shows the land of a Fred O. Howe, patent dated 1882, and it's superimposed on a current map. After the passing of the Homestead Act, there were additional Nebraska land acts, one being the Kincaid Act of 1904. It was named for Congressman Moses P. Kincaid of O'Neill, Nebraska. People could claim up to 640 acres in west central Nebraska. That was primarily known as the Sandhills land, and it was in 37 counties. They could not commute the land. The final patent was issued on 40 acres of land in 1941, and the act was repealed on the 21st of October, 1976. If they had not filed under a Homestead Act, they could enter 640 acres. Previous entrymen could claim an additional land acreage to add up to 640 acres. They had 5 years to prove up on the land, and like the Homestead Act, they received credit for military service. About 1,600 patents were granted for approximately 800,000 acres. This is a map showing the counties that had land available under the Kincaid Act. Further north into the sandhills, it was difficult to farm successfully on the land because it was just that, it was sand. And it was deemed more desirable by the ranchers. Once the farmers arrived there were disagreements with the ranchers and out-and-out wars. They resulted in illegal fencing of land and land frauds. This is a photograph in the collection at the Knight Museum and Sandhills Center in Alliance, Nebraska. It shows the line of people at the land office in 1904 waiting to file under the Kincaid Act. The Timber Culture Act of 1873 allowed claimants to plant at least 40 acres of trees upon a quarter section of land. They had to cultivate them for 8 years in order to prove up, and 675 trees had to survive. In 1874, it was amended to 10 acres of trees. The land tracts were not greater than 160 acres, and only one timber claim was allowed in each section. The arid conditions in western Nebraska and the Panhandle often meant that those trees did not survive. Newspapers usually contain information from land offices. This is an example from the Sioux County Journal of Harrison, Nebraska, dated the 3rd of November, 1892. Notice that they were all timber culture entries, and they give the date, the person, post office address of record. Now, there was also the Stock Raising Homestead Act, which was passed in 1916. It provided that the claimant could claim 640 acres of public land, which was a full section or equivalent to that. The surface rights and the subsurface rights, which were also known as mineral rights, were separated. No cultivation was required, but range improvement was required. Homestead files that are not on Fold 3 can be searched through the National Archives. The outline form NATF 84 contains further information for submitting a request for copies of the file for $50. The Homestead National Monument is located near Beatrice in Gage County. It is worth visiting if you have homestead ancestors. Nebraska's noted author Willa Cather in 1918 wrote that the red grass was disappearing. The whole face of the country was changing. There were wooden houses where the old sod dwellings used to be.